Tonight we're going to take a look at the bowling score challenge on Topcoder. Now, bowling score scores a round of 10 pin bowling. A point is scored or earned for each pin knocked down for the roll, and bonus points are registered for strikes and spares. Strikes earn 10 points plus the next two rolls. Spares earn 10 points plus the next roll for bonus. A perfect game earns 300 points total, and a bowler may roll a third roll in the 10th frame if the first roll is a strike or the second roll is a spare. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the algorithm. Now, bowling scores takes in a string, which I call scores in this. Now, again, the incoming or the input is a string, so the first thing I do is I split the string on the space. So a bowling score will look like this series of characters coming in. Digits are registered for pin numbers, slashes are registered for spares, and X's are registered for strikes. Now, what happens then is I map the scores into separate arrays. So I split them on the between two digits, or a spare or a strike, depending on the frame. And so what will be returned is a matrix or an array of arrays coming in. Then I locate each of the strike locations and the spare locations for frames 1 through 8. Now, the reason we do 1 through 8 because 1 through 8 are scored exactly the same. When we're running through the score, frame 9 and 10 have special circumstances, and we'll get to those in a minute. So in order to locate the strikes and spares, all I do is I pass in the scores array or matrix, and I then create an empty array for the spare locations and an empty array for the strike locations. Then I iterate over the scores array or matrix, and when I locate a spare, I pass the index, or I append the index of that spare to the spare location, and if I run across a strike, I pass the strike index to the strike location, and then I return an array of the strike locations and spare locations, and of course those then are set to the strike locations and spare locations in the main algorithm, or in the main method. What I do next then is I score the open frames. Now, an open frame is a frame that does not have a spare or strike allocated to it. So this is a straight scoring of numbers 0 through 9 in a scored frame. And so I go to the score open frames method, and my score starts at 0. The scores matrix is passed in, and then for each score, as long as the frame doesn't contain a slash or an X, it will map the frame to an integer, again because these are a matrix of arrays of strings, so it's an array of strings, and then I sum that array to add to the score. Once all of the frames have been checked, the score is then returned to the open scores, or the open variable. Then I score the spares. Now the spares is passed to the score spares, and I'm passing in the scores matrix and the spare locations. Remember, we found those earlier. So I score spares by, again, setting the score to 0, and then for each a location, remember these are locations frames 1 through frame 8, then I add to the score the location plus the next roll. Remember, a spare is given bonus points. It counts for 10, which is the number of pins that are knocked down, plus the next roll. If the next roll is a strike, then I add 20 to the score total. If the next roll is not a strike, then I add that numerical value to 10 and then add that to the scores total. Again, remember those are only frames 1 through 8 because 9 and 10 have special circumstances. Then I score the strikes. Now remember, strikes also get bonus points. A strike's bonus points are 10 plus the next 2 rolls. So if a strike is followed by 2 strikes, that strike is worth 30 points. If a strike is followed by a spare, that's again a numerical roll and a spare, then that strike is worth 20 points. And again, if a strike is followed by 2 numerical values, such as 1 and 3, then that strike is only worth 14 total points. So I pass that to the score strikes method. Now the score strikes method is a bit longer. It has various combinations that are permitted for a strike because there are so many strike scoring methods. So the first one is, first I check to see if it's a perfect game. So if every roll in the in strikes is an X, then that again gives me 300. Again, a perfect game is scored at 300. However, if it's not a perfect game, then I need to check each of the strike locations. So what is passed in then, or what is happening, is I iterate over the strike locations, and at each location, unless the location is, or at each location, again, I'm checking every location, the strikes location, and if the location is less than or equal to 8, again, we want to only deal with frames 1 through 8, then what I'm going to do then is I'm going to check to see if the next 2 rolls are strikes. If the next 2 rolls are strikes, then I'm adding 30 to the score. And again, I find that by checking the first position in each of the following frames. However, if the next 2 rolls are not strikes, then what I need to do is check every one of those positions afterwards. So if I get 2 strikes, I get a third roll. So if it's 2 strikes followed by a numerical, again, you can't have 2 strikes and a spare. It just doesn't work that way. Or a spare slash, it doesn't work that way. So it'll be 2 strikes and a numerical. Then it'll be 20 plus whatever that numerical is. And again, that numerical is just the scores location plus 2. Again, it's 2 frames greater, and it's the 0 location in that second frame, and I make that into an integer, and then I add that to the score total. However, if it's a strike and then a numerical and then a spare mark, then the strike score is going to be equal to 20, so I add that to the score. Else, if I get a strike and then just 2 numericals, like a 1 and a 3 again, then that is going to be worth 14. So it's 10 plus the score of the first roll, or the score of the next frame total. So I map that frame to integers, and then I sum that frame. So it's 10 plus 1 and 3, so 14. And then I return the score for that. Again, scoring strikes is a little bit more complicated because we have an extra roll to add on to that. And so I've categorized each of those potential rolls. The next method that I have to do is I have to score frames 9 and 10. Now, frames 9 and 10 are a little bit different. Again, if frame 9 is a strike, then I have to score the next 2 rolls. Now, remember, frame 10 is the last frame, so I have to score the first 2 rolls of frame 10. So let's go take a look at score frame 9. So the first thing that happens is I check to see if frame 9 is an open frame. That means it doesn't have a strike or a spare in it. So unless the scores in frame 8 include an X or a slash, then I'm going to sum those scores and return that sum for frame 9. However, if there's a strike in there, then I have to account for the various things that happen when strikes happen. So if 9 is a strike, then I check to see if the next 2 rolls, and that's roll 1 and roll 2 in the 10th frame are strikes, then I return 30. However, if it's not 2 strikes or 3 strikes, then I check to see if that second roll is a strike. If it is, then I know the third roll has to be a numeric because it can't be a spare. So then I add 20 plus whatever that third roll is. So if it's a 4, then I get 20 plus 4, which will return 24. However, if the strike is followed by a spare, so if there's a spare value, so if it's a strike in number 9 or in the 9th frame, and I get a numerical and a spare mark in the second roll, then that strike is worth 20. However, if frame 9 is rolled as a strike and frame 10 is not a strike and there's not a spare mark in the second roll, then I just have to add the numericals. And there won't be a third roll in that numerical because it's not a spare or a strike, so I can just sum that 9th or that 10th frame, so it's 10 plus the sum of the 10th frame. Okay, so, and then finally, if frame 9 is a spare, then I score it as a spare, so it's returning 10 plus the first roll in the 10th frame. Okay, so those are all the possible combinations for frame 9. Again, frame 9 is special in that 10 has an extra roll in it, so I have to be careful and be able to deal with that extra roll in frame 10 if there's a strike or a spare in frame 10. Okay, and then finally, the last thing that I need to do is I need to find the value of frame 10. Now remember, there are no frames after frame 10, so if there's a strike as the first roll in frame 10, then I have to deal with the other 2 rolls in frame 10. So frame 10 is going to have the most complicated of all the methods, but again, I've posed all the categories that we have to score against for frame 10. And there's not a whole lot that I can do with frame 10. I just have to deal with frame 10 as its own special device. Okay, so frame 10 has a number of categories. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potential categories. The first category is an open frame. That means there are no strikes and no spares. So what I do if it's an open frame, I sum frame 10. So I just return frame 0 plus 1 and frame 1 plus 1. And again, all I'm passing to frame 10 is the frame. I don't have to deal with all the other scores or any other potential scores in this frame, again, because there are no frames after this. So I can pass in just the frame to scoring 10. So 10 is equal to okay, yeah, so 10 is equal to score frame 10, and then notice I'm just passing frame 10 in. And we'll talk about what's going on here in a second. All right, so frame 10, again, has these categories. So if it's an open frame, it's going to score the first and second rolls in frame 10, and then return that. So if frame 10 length is 2, it scores those 2. If and I can actually make this just a little bit cleaner. So I can go frame dot map, and then I'd pass in the block to I. So I'm making all those numbers I, and I can sum, and there we go. All right. However, if the frame passed into frame 10 contains 3 strikes. So remember, frame 10 gets 3 rolls if the first is a strike or a spare, or the first. If the first roll is a strike, you get 2 extra rolls. If the first 2 rolls is a spare, you get an extra roll. Again, these are the bonus rolls that you can get for strikes or spares. Okay, so if the first roll is a strike, the second roll is a strike, and the third roll is a strike, then I'm going to return 30 for scoring frame 10 because it's a strike plus 2 strikes. So what I do to return 30 is I check and see if frame 1 is also a strike and frame 1 and frame 2 are strikes. If frame 2 is not a strike, or the second roll in frame 10 is a strike, but the third roll is not a strike, then I account for that. So if it's a strike, and a numeric, remember it can't be a spare on that third roll. You can either roll a strike or a numeric. So if it's a numeric, then I'm going to return 20, that's for the 2 strikes, plus whatever that integer is, that numeric is for the third roll. So if it's 9, I return 29. If it's a 1, I return 21. And what this check is that if frame 1 is also a strike, again, the only way a frame 1 can be a strike is if the first roll was a strike, so I only have to check that one value. Then the next possible combination, and notice I'm going with all strike rolls first, and then I'll deal with the spare rolls in a second. The next combination is if I roll a strike, the second roll is not a strike but a numeric, and then the third roll completes the spare, then I return 20 if the first roll is a strike and the third roll is a spare mark, a hash, slash, whatever you want to call it. Then the next combination is if I roll a strike for the first roll and then roll a numeric but don't complete the numeric, so it's kind of like an open frame scenario, then I have to, it's the strike plus those 2 integer rolls. So again, it's 10 plus the sum of the integers in that frame at position 1, or index 1 and index 2. And that's, again, the check is if frame 0 is a strike. Then let's say that the first roll is not a strike, it's a numeric, but the second roll is a spare, then I have to deal with the spare bonus. So if I get a spare and then my third roll is a strike, then I return 20. Again, it's the spare plus the next roll. If I roll a spare and I don't roll a strike, and again, remember I only get 3 rolls, then that third roll is going to be a numeric, so it's 10 plus whatever that numeric is. And again, the check for that is if the index 1 is a slash and index 2 is not a strike. Alright, so that's scoring frame 10. Then once I have all of those individual scores checked, then I just sum those individual scores and return whatever that score is. So again, that's the score of the open frames, the score of the strikes, the score of the spares for frames 1 through 8. Then I add to that the score of 9 and the score of 10. Now we're wondering what this ternary is doing for 9 and 10. Well, if I need to check the score midpoint, so somewhere in the game, but not including the 9th or 10th frame, then what I have to do is, because of the method that I built for 9s and 10s, 9 checks, when I score 9s, it checks the values at index 8 in the scores matrix. And when I score for 10, I'm actually just passing in a frame. So if I am not in the 9th or 10th frame, I can't make those checks. And if I can't make those checks, then it's going to throw an error when I'm actually running through those checks. So what I do then is I pass a ternary. So if the score's length doesn't equal 10, so it's going to return 0 for those scores because we haven't gotten there yet. But if the score's length is equal to 10, then it's going to score frame 9. Now remember, we have to be careful when we score frame 9, because if that last roll is a spare or a strike, then I have to deal with frame 10 to complete that score. And if I don't get frame 9 or frame 10, then that score is incomplete. So again, those are things that we have to check for. So let's go ahead and run the RSpec. So let me clear the screen down here and run bundle exec RSpec, and then this spec is located in the spec folder, and I run the RSpec bowling underscore score underscore spec.rb. Now 4 tests are run, so I score to see if there are all open frames. So let's go ahead and take a look at that spec real fast. So my open frames is if there are no strikes or spares in the scorecard, then I'm checking against that, and if the scores are all ones for every roll, then again the comment, maybe this bowler should put bumpers on. So we are expecting it to be a score of 20. So this is a score of 2 for each of the 10 frames. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. So again, it scores each of the open frames. The next bowling score scores a perfect game. So again, a perfect game is a game of all strikes for all 10 frames. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 total strikes. Remember, each of those is worth 30 points, and with the exception of the last 2, because those are bonus rolls. So that's 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, 210, 240, 270, and 300. And again, these last 2 strikes here are bonus rolls for that strike in the 10th frame. So that would be a 300 game. If I have an unfinished game, so like 12, 4 and a spare, 8-1, strike, and then 5-8, then it's going to score each of those. Now, if this last contains a strike, then this score is not given yet, because that then we're still awaiting that second roll. If this is a spare, then this score will give 20 points, but this score won't be complete yet, because again it's waiting for that bonus roll. So again, something that we have to look out for. Now, the next test is, and I'm sorry, this test will return 56 for those, because you have a round of 3, and then this is a spare, so that's 10 plus the next roll is 18. So 18 plus 3 is 21, and then plus 9 is 30, and then that next roll is a strike, plus the next 2 rolls is 18, so that's 48, and then 48 plus 8 is 56. So again, the score there should be 56. And then finally, it handles zeros in the score. So if I roll a 0 frame, it should score those zeros as zeros. So the first open frame, no score was made. Then you rolled a 4 and a 5, so that's 9. And then the next frame is 0 and 9, so that's a total of 18. Then you rolled a strike, plus the next 2 rolls, that's 15. So 18 and 15 is 33. Then 5 is 38, and then 8 is 46, and then a spare, so 10 plus 3 is 13, so that's 59, plus 7, because it's an open, so that's 66, and then 7 is 73, and then a spare, which is 10 plus 9 is 19, so 73 and 19 is 92. All right, so those are all the tests that I've run on this, and as per the spec or the test file on Topcoder, so each of these works, and it runs through and scores the game perfectly fine. All right, if there are any questions or comments, please feel free to send those messages to me on the forum, and I will gladly answer them as soon as I possibly can. Thank you.